What if the enemy you feared wasn't even alive? Think about that for a moment. You're in the middle of Afghanistan, a land already soaked with blood, with danger lurking behind every ridge, every shadow. You're armed, alert, ready for Taliban ambushes, ready for IEDs underfoot. But suddenly you realize what's out there watching you isn't human at all. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. The British bled here, the Soviets fell, and for 2 decades, Americans patrolled its deserts and mountains. History lies stacked beneath its soil. Alexander the Great crossed these same passes, and countless armies have spilled blood since. It's not just a battlefield, it's a burial ground. And that's what makes these stories so unsettling. Because in a land so steeped in war and death, who can be sure the shadows and whispers are only in their heads? Today, we're covering 3 of the eeriest paranormal stories from the war in Afghanistan. Encounters that Marines and soldiers still whisper about to this day. And maybe, just maybe, a reminder that sometimes the things you fear most don't carry rifles at all. Our first story begins at Camp Dwyer in Helmand province. On the edge of that base stood a lonely tower known as Post Hotel. In 2011, 2 Marines, Corporal Jacob Lima and Lance Corporal David Morales, were assigned there. They thought the enemy they had to fear was outside the wire. They were wrong. Helmand Province, 2011. The U.S. Marines had been in Afghanistan for years by then, fighting some of the fiercest battles of the war. But nothing could prepare Lima and Morales for what they would face at Post Hotel. From the outside, Camp Dwyer looked like any other forward operating base. Dusty HESCO barriers stacked high, watchtowers looming above the desert floor, and the constant hum of generators echoing in the night. Inside, life was a strange mix of routine and raw tension. By day, helicopters thundered overhead and convoys rumbled in and out. By night, silence, darkness, and Marines left with their thoughts. Post Hotel wasn't just another tower. It sat inside the compound of the Afghan National Army, the ANA. Marines had to work side by side with Afghan soldiers, brothers in arms, but also unpredictable. Everyone knew insider attacks happened. Everyone slept with one eye open. But there was something else about this post. Something darker. It was after midnight when the first thing happened. The desert was freezing, breath fogging inside helmets, fingers aching even through gloves. The only light came from faint flood lamps, casting weak yellow circles into the endless black. Morales stood watch in the tower. Lima sat behind him, catching a few minutes of rest. Then it started. The sound of boots on metal stairs, slow, heavy, one step, then another. Morales gripped his rifle tighter, called out, no answer. He yanked the hatch open, surefire lights sweeping the stairwell. Nothing. The staircase was empty. Moments later, the radio crackled. Static at first, then a garbled voice, too soft to make out. Not English, not Pashto. Morales swore it sounded Russian. Lima thought it was Arabic. Whatever it wasn't supposed to be there. Both men brushed it off. Bad signal, interference. But that was only the beginning, because Post Hotel had much more in store for them. It was 2100 hours the next night. The desert air was freezing, the kind that seeps into your bones. Morales scanned his sector through his PVS-14 night vision goggles, the eerie green tint painting the world in shadows. Across the HESCO barriers, the floodlights cast long, jagged shapes. Normal. until one shadow began to move. Not walking, not tied to any person's body. It glided, silent, fluid. "Corporal, you seeing this?" Morales whispered. Lima swung his surefire flashlight across the sand. The bright beam cut through the dark, straight onto the shadow. But the shadow didn't vanish. It just stood there. Then, as if mocking them, it slid away, dissolving into nothing. Later that same night, a thunderous bang rattled the tower wall. Both Marines spun, rifles raised. The sound echoed like a sledgehammer striking steel. "Contact!" Morales hissed. But there was no return fire, no muzzle flashes, nothing on thermal. Then came the footsteps again. Slow, measured, coming up toward their platform. Lima called out, "Identify yourself." Silence. The footsteps kept climbing. He ripped the hatch open, weapon aimed, empty. Hours later, Morales muttered, "Something's off." Ricks, another Marine, rotated in for that watch. Froze mid-sentence, eyes wide. He pointed at the stairs. "Someone's behind you," he whispered. Lima spun, and for a fraction of a second he saw it. A figure, dark and human-shaped, following Ricks up the stairs, close enough to be breathing on his neck. "Stop right there," Lima barked. But the stairs were empty. The figure was gone. Later, Lima admitted, "I'd rather face a Taliban ambush than see that again." He forced himself back to his patrol. Marines don't quit duty over nerves. Lima walked the HESCO line, scanning corners, breathing steady. But the feeling of being watched gnawed at him. His instincts screamed that something was behind him. He turned, nothing. Just the tower, just the sand. He exhaled, muttered, "Get a grip," and kept walking. And then, without warning, he felt it. A cold hand clamped on his shoulder. Firm, real, like another Marine had just grabbed him. He spun around, rifle leveled. No one. Only empty night. He whispered into his mic, "Something touched me. I'm not alone out here." Another night, Morales watched the berm through NVGs. Off in the distance, dust began to swirl. At first, he thought it was rotor wash from a helicopter, but there was no flight scheduled. The dust rose higher, twisting, taking shape, arms, legs, a torso. He ripped the goggles off, nothing but sand. Put them back on, the figure was there, walking, purposeful. Then it collapsed, dissolving back into the earth. Morales didn't speak of it for 2 weeks. When he finally told Lima, the corporal just nodded. Too many men were seeing too much. Even the dog knew. Ugly Betty, the mutt left behind by British troops, had become the squad's unofficial mascot. She growled at corners where nothing stood, barked furiously at empty sand. Sometimes she refused to climb the tower at all, cowering in fear. "Betty sees what we don't," Ricks muttered one night, stroking her fur. No one laughed. The radios made it worse. One moment, clear comms. The next, static. And sometimes, voices. Morales swore he heard Russian. "Broze oruzie." "Drop your weapon." Lima said he caught Arabic. Another Marine claimed it was a woman's whisper, repeating the same word over and over. Every time they tried to record it, the whispers cut off. Every single time. By then, Lima and Morales refused to take shifts alone. Sergeant Alex Whitaker remembered. "Guys would rather pull latrine duty than that post, because once you stood watch at Post Hotel, you knew something else was standing there with you." By the summer of 2011, Post Hotel wasn't just another assignment. It was punishment. Rumors crawled across the base like wildfire. New arrivals were warned. Don't look too long at the shadows. Don't answer the footsteps. And whatever you do, don't stand alone. Even Afghan soldiers refused to go near the tower at night. They whispered about curses. Some said the land itself was unholy, that it had soaked up too much blood over too many centuries. But the most chilling part? For Morales, it didn't end when he left. Back in Texas, weeks after deployment, he lay in bed when he heard it again, the same metallic clang on the walls. He sat up, heart pounding. The house was empty. Another night, he swore someone brushed past him in the hallway. Heavy boots, a whisper at his ear. He spun, weapon in hand. Nothing. It followed me back, Morales said later. Whatever was in that tower, it wasn't stuck in Afghanistan. It came home with me. Only then did Lima and Morales learn about the post's history. Months before their rotation, an A&A pickup truck had lost control and slammed into the Hesco wall, just 30 feet from their tower. 2 Afghan soldiers died instantly. The wall still bore the scars. Maybe that crash marked the ground. Maybe it cursed the tower. Maybe Post Hotel was never just a guard post at all. Maybe it was a doorway, not just between Marines and the enemy, but between the living and the dead. If Camp Dwyer was about shadows that refused to die, then Kunar province was about something even stranger, something that twisted reality itself. It was late 2010, deep in Afghanistan's Pesh Valley, a place soldiers called the Valley of Death. Rugged mountains rose like jagged knives, their dark outlines cutting across the night sky. The valley floor was littered with stone villages, goat paths, and the constant threat of ambush. On this night, 3 U.S. soldiers, Specialist Carter, Private First Class Ramirez, and Staff Sergeant Dalton, were assigned to routine guard duty. Their post overlooked a winding dirt road just below their position. The air was unnervingly still. No wind, no movement, just the endless hum of insects and the distant bark of dogs from unseen villages. Each man scanned the valley through his NVGs, night vision goggles. Anyone who's worn them knows. They transform the night into an eerie green world, where shadows stretch unnaturally and every sound feels amplified. They reveal details invisible to the naked eye. Shapes, silhouettes, faint movement across dark ground. It was just after 2200 hours. Dalton checked his watch, sighed, and muttered, "Another long night." But this night would not be routine, because within minutes, they would see something that defied every rule of reality, something that none of them would ever forget. And once you see something like this, you can't unsee it. It began innocently. Carter whispered, "Movement, left side coming up the road." All 3 men raised their NVGs, scanning the dirt track. There, clear as day, was a young boy, no older than 12, thin, barefoot, herding 4 goats slowly up the road. He carried a stick, guiding them with lazy swats. Ramirez squinted. "Kid's out late." Dalton frowned. "Locals don't walk here after dark. Too dangerous." They kept watching. The goats were real enough. Their shapes, their heads bobbing, the occasional sound of hooves tapping stone. And the boy? Perfectly visible through the goggles. But then Carter did something simple. Something that would turn the ordinary into the impossible. He lifted his NVGs and looked with his naked eyes. The goats were still there. 4 of them, plain as day, trotting up the road. But the boy was gone. "Where the hell?" Carter gasped. He shoved the goggles back on. The boy was back again, guiding his goats as if nothing was wrong. Off again, on again. Each time, goats remained. Boy vanished. He hissed at the others. "Check, now!" Ramirez pulled off his NVH, eyes wide. Goats, but no kid. Dalton yanked his off, checked, slammed them back down. Son of a bitch, he's only there with the goggles. For 20 long minutes, the three men rotated, goggles on, goggles off. Every time the boy appeared in that ghostly green glow. And every time they removed the goggles, he vanished. The goats never faltered. Real, solid, living. But their shepherd, something else entirely. Fear prickled their skin. Ramirez muttered prayers under his breath. Dalton, the hardened sergeant, clenched his jaw. "If this is a trick, I'll eat my rifle." Then, just as they began to believe it might be over, the impossible returned. The goats drifted further up the road, and for a while the boy seemed to fade with them. But after a stretch of silence, Carter scanned the tree line again. His breath caught. Jesus Christ, he's back. And this time, the boy wasn't hurting. He was standing still. The goats grazed lazily at his feet. But the boy was facing them, directly, his face pale in the NVG's green wash. And though they were far away, all three swore they saw the same thing. He was smiling, not the innocent smile of a child, but something stretched, wrong, a grin too wide, too knowing. And then the boy raised his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he beckoned, a curling of his fingers, a universal gesture. "Come closer." "Hell no," Ramirez hissed, his voice trembling. Dalton barked, "Stay sharp, don't move." But the boy kept motioning. "Come closer, come closer." The goats stayed put, chewing, oblivious. But the boy's hand never dropped. His smile never faltered. Finally, without warning, he turned and vanished. 1 second there, the next, gone. The goats, however, remained. The three men didn't speak for a long time. When they did, their voices were low, unsteady. Dalton finally muttered, "We keep this between us. Nobody's going to believe a damn word of it." By dawn, word still leaked. Stories have a way of traveling faster than bullets in the valley. The response from command was what you'd expect. Silence, dismissal. You boys were tired. Imagination under NVGs? Forget it. But the men never forgot. Because they hadn't just seen the boy. They'd seen him smile. They'd seen him beckon. And they knew, deep down, he hadn't been herding goats at all. He had been waiting. Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires for a reason. For millennia, blood has been spilled on its mountains and deserts. Alexander's armies, Mongols, British troops, Soviets, Americans. Every empire leaves its dead behind. And maybe, not all of them rest easy. At Camp Dwyer, shadows glided against the floodlights, whispers crept along the stairwells, and Marines swore they saw figures following them up the tower, figures that weren't there. Some carried those hauntings home. At Kunar, soldiers watched a boy who existed only through night vision. His goats alive, his body spectral. And when he appeared again, he smiled, beckoning them closer, like some trap half set between the living and the dead. Were these the restless spirits of war? Or something far stranger? Phenomena beyond human understanding, glimpsed only in the hours when men are exhausted, afraid, and closest to death. One Marine summed it up best. "I wasn't afraid of the Taliban that night. I was afraid of what I couldn't shoot, what I couldn't touch, and what I might have brought home." But Kunar wasn't the only place soldiers reported the impossible. Because hundreds of miles south, at the largest NATO base in Afghanistan, There were whispers of something even stranger. Not shadows in a tower, not a ghost shepherd, but a woman in white, seen standing in the dead of night at Kandahar airfield. It was 300 hours. The flight line was quiet. Only the hum of distant generators and the faint buzz of sodium floodlights. Sergeant Miller and Private Johnson were pulling night security near a row of grounded Blackhawks. The air was dry, biting cold. They stamped their boots against the gravel to stay awake. Johnson squinted. "Sarge, you see that?" Miller followed his gaze. At the edge of the lights, maybe 50 meters out, stood a figure. Small, thin, draped in white. At first, Miller thought it was just a tarp caught on rebar. But then, it shifted, not blowing in the wind, turning, facing them. "She's watching us," Johnson muttered. Miller gripped his M4. "Could be local. Could be Taliban baiting us." They started moving closer, rifles raised. But as they advanced, the figure didn't retreat, didn't flinch, just stood there, veil covering her face. 10 meters closer, and the lights flickered. For a split second, the figure seemed to glow, not bright, just wrong. Johnson swore later. She was smiling under it. I couldn't see her face, but I knew she was smiling. And then she lifted her hand, slowly, fingers curling, motioning, beckoning them forward. Miller blinked, and she was gone. Nothing but gravel. Nothing but night. The two men swept the area, NVGs, thermals. No heat signatures, no footprints. But both swore they saw her. They didn't report it. Not officially. Because at KF, stories like that spread fast, and not in a good way. You tell command you saw a ghost, you'd be laughed off shift. But within weeks, other soldiers began whispering. The same description. A figure in white, just at the edge of the floodlights. Always watching, always gone when approached. Sometimes she was seen near the perimeter fences between the HESCO barriers. Other times on the flight line, near the silent hulks of grounded aircraft. One night, a Canadian contractor swore he saw her right outside his tent. He pulled back the flap, and there she stood. Close enough to touch. He blinked, and she vanished. Dogs on base felt it too. Military K9s that normally snarled at strangers went stiff, whining at the empty night. One handler swore his Malinois wouldn't leave its kennel for hours after the woman was sighted. The strangest part? She always appeared between 200 and 400 hours. Always when the base was at its quietest, the soldiers there most tired. By now, no one joked about it, because too many men, American, British, Canadian, were telling the same story. Eventually, the legend spread. Soldiers began calling her the White Veil of KF. Some said she was the ghost of a local woman killed when the airfield was expanded. Bulldozers had leveled villages and graves alike. Maybe she was one of them. Others thought she was older, a djinn, something ancient tied to the land. And then there were the darker theories, that she wasn't watching at all. She was choosing, marking men. Because a few soldiers swore, after seeing her, something followed them home. Afghanistan is a graveyard of empires, but maybe it's also a graveyard of souls. At Kandahar airfield, men swore they saw a woman in white. Watching, waiting, not Taliban, not insurgent, something else. And once you've seen her smile through that veil, you'll never forget it. And now, I'll leave it to you. What do you think these Marines and soldiers saw? Shadows of trauma? Ghosts of the fallen? Or proof that Afghanistan holds secrets darker than war itself? Thanks for watching, and thank you for liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Now I want to hear from you. Are there any Marines, soldiers, or family of veterans watching? Have you ever heard stories like these? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to read them. And tell me, what can I do to make these videos even better? Your suggestions really matter. Until next time, remember, sometimes the scariest things on the battlefield aren't even alive.